Hi there, Blue Adept. I feel like I want to respond to you, but I cannot focus in enough on one particular video of yours to answer any particular video. And since you've replied to my reply and you kind of opened up a little bit in that video, that's where I'm going to attach this. First of all, let me just say that your comment about if you could just vlog with my inimitable style, you do it but you can't. Well, to me this just illustrates the Einsteinian concept of self-image relativity, because you're certainly, to my mind, far more well-spoken than I am, and I would just I would just recommend to you that I don't know what happened when you went from having a really bad video image to having a really good video image, but at the moment that happened, you suddenly started wearing dark glasses. I don't know if you have the kind of lenses that turn dark when it gets too bright or what, but if you could somehow contrive to make your glasses clear again, and if you just wore a dark shirt and made the background behind you darker than your face, you would probably be a whole lot more like me as a vlogger than you think. Because and also stop with the proofs, not because this YouTube video log format is addictive and popular precisely because it's all about the face, the human, I believe anyway, the human mind has evolved to be very fascinated by human faces, to want to interact with people, personas, the substance of humanness, and that's the real selling point to me of YouTube. Anybody who hides their face, no matter, like I'm a big fan of the Frankenstein videos for their content. I don't know if you are familiar with Frankenstein the Famous Monster here on YouTube, but the content's fantastic. I just have a problem watching a simulated face because it's just radio to me. The whole essence of YouTube is hearing people express themselves. It's a terrible format. Video logs are a terrible format for arguing or debating. Most of the debates that I've seen on YouTube where the people actually know what they're talking about are still not very good debates, because in the absence of an enclosed setting, people just get away with murder, even when they don't realize it. They're leaving things out. It's very hard to follow people in the detail that's necessary to actually have a back and forth that's about more than personality, that's about just the ideas. Anyway, I've gotten completely off the subject. One of the reasons I'm vlogging is not so much to, and I'm working this out for myself, not so much to express my ideas, although that's important to me and I thought that's what I was doing to begin with, but rather to marry my ideas to my personality, to my external presentation, because most of this stuff that I've been talking about on YouTube, I have just been talking to myself about in my head for 30 years, and I'm really kind of semi-disgusted when I try to watch my own videos. It's just not coming out like I want it to. But enough about this. On to another subject. Like I say, I can't really speak directly to any of your proofs, and as you said in this new video, you know, you're using the term proof in one of its precise definitions that is nevertheless not, I think, how people take it when they hear it. And you know, you might want to think about that. People think you're saying you're proving the existence of God, and on some level of your agnosticism, I think you're hoping that you are. And let me just say, in my development as a vlogger, one of the things I'm trying to overcome is an unwillingness to say the same thing over and over for fear that I should say it once and then be done with it. But I think you have to repeat things in different videos in different contexts. So I'll if I've said this before, and also I can't remember all the things that I've said in the videos that I've made. So if I've said this here, I'm going to say it again. I consider myself an atheist because I reject every religious creed that I have ever heard to the extent that it can be expressed in words. And I feel that all religions misstate the facts of existence to the point where it is more harmful than helpful to use to claim a literal adherence to any faith. On the other hand, I am an agnostic in the sense that I know that we don't know everything, and that for the foreseeable future we can't know everything. And every scientist who has ever lived, every philosopher who has ever lived, has been more ignorant than wise, I think, at least in the things that can be communicated. And certainly any real scientist who is fairly objective about the pursuit of science knows that you know, Einstein died not knowing many things which just your average high-energy physicist today knows, and that's going to be true for you today if you're a physicist. Probably you're going to die, and then someone's going to find something out that you never knew, may not even have suspected. So how can you not be an agnostic in that sense? But I feel very confident that that what is not known is not going to reveal the truth of beliefs that already seem ridiculously primitive and self-contradictory, just as all our increased understanding of science is not going to suddenly and unexpectedly prove the theory of phlogiston as it was formulated, you know, hundreds of years ago. No, that's discredited. We're moving on to something else. There may come some point in which someone may say, hey, you know, this new discovery, it's weirdly like the phlogiston theory. But that's not going to be the same as saying the phlogiston theory is correct. You see what I'm saying? Okay, I need to move on from that because I really don't want this to go super long. I wanted to talk about your. I thought that when I watched some of your proof videos, I thought that what you were arguing was that consciousness is independent of, as you said, the substrate. That you were arguing for the model of consciousness, which says that eventually a computer will be able to simulate consciousness, will be able to have consciousness in the same sense that humans have consciousness. Now that's something that I provisionally accept, because I have not seen any evidence. I've seen loads of objections to this ever being possible, but I've never seen any good evidence that it is impossible. And when I'm not remotely in a position to judge it directly, but when I compare the arguments for one side or the other, to me, it seems much more likely that soon there will come a time when, number one, computers will seem remarkably like people and may be able to fake personhood, if not actually have it, and then we will really be in the position of asking ourselves, well, what is consciousness? Which, of course, is one of the fundamental questions that has never been clearly answered, but we will be asking it in a whole new set of circumstances. And I believe that what will end up happening is that machines that are conscious will be thought of as being conscious. Someone here on YouTube called that the gentleman's agreement, that I'm willing to stipulate that what's going on inside your head is like what's going on inside my head, because we seem so similar in the reactions that I associate with my own consciousness. But neither one of us really knows, and we can write endless science fiction horror stories about that. But the other thing I also believe, I think is coming, is the possibility that, let me restate that. I believe, provisionally, I believe everything about the future. I only believe provisionally. I'm ready to be proved wrong about anything. But I believe that we're going to, that someone, probably not me, I get the feeling I'll be dead before this actually happens. I'll just miss it, which is why I'm so happy that I have solved my philosophical issues about death, because I think that within the next, I don't know what, no more than 50 or 100 years, people are going to be given the opportunity, the choice, which does not exist today, of continuing their lives indefinitely in a simulated form. And that will fundamentally change everything, because up until this point in history, you really had only two choices. One was to just die and accept that you were going to die and come to some kind of terms with that, or believe some story about what happens to you after death. But in either case, you died. You didn't have to make a choice about the dying. And I really believe that there will come a time in the not too distant future where people will have to say to themselves, if I do this and this thing happens and I change into a simulated version of myself, will I still be me? And they will have to come to some sort of conclusion, and they will have to come to it faced with the evidence of people existing after their biological death in simulations, And by the way, I've got to say this, I've become, I'm stepping all over a screenplay of mine by even talking about this. There's something that I haven't written and that I'm really fairly high on. But unfortunately, I just can't stand to not talk about these things. But I really think that this is going to be a real possibility. But I'm prepared to die before it happens, and I'm also prepared to have it not happen, and see that there was something wrong if someone can show that there's something wrong. But then finally we get to this issue of a lot of your proofs seem to center around two ideas. One is the idea of a universal consciousness, because algorithms can be seen to exist in all matter and all interactions, and that therefore there must be a universal consciousness within the universe as a whole, if in fact our minds, our consciousness is caused by the algorithms that we can define within the workings of the brain. Well, I don't see that. I see it as something to think about, but just at the most basic level, the brain is attached to the nervous system, to the body, and the entire universe is not attached to anything in that way. So whatever kind of consciousness you can imagine for it is not the active feedback loop that a human consciousness is. I mean, my brain is more than capable of perceiving what you had, for breakfast, and what your house looks like, but I don't know those things because my brain is not attached to your nervous system. And this giant, underlying consciousness is not attached in any human-like way to matter, or even in any octopus-like way. So there. But this idea of consciousness, of other forms of consciousness existing in ordered matter that we don't think of as conscious, is an interesting idea to me, and one that was brought to my attention by a guy by the name of Hans Moravec. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a roboticist and one of the proponents of this idea of a machine consciousness singularity coming. The two guys that I have read on that subject who have seemed very convincing to me are Hans Moravec and Ray Kurzweil. Moravec talks at length about the unsettling implications of modern mind theory, the idea that consciousness is a process rather than a thing, and the implications for consciousness therefore existing in other forms, like for instance in a rock, or in the form, for instance, of a book. You can, if you choose to, define a book as a conscious program of life when it's interpreted by a sympathetic reader. But that's the key thing. It's the interpretation. It's the playbook. What's the playbook for the universe? If it's conscious, how is that consciousness being interpreted? Is it completely sealed off and inextricable from meaningless information for lack of a playbook, for lack of a sympathetic observer? I think that the issue of consciousness is so far beyond the issue of the definition of consciousness is so far beyond us at this point, scientifically speaking, and despite 4,000 years of religious philosophy, beyond philosophy, the great mysteries, there are either 3 or 4, are what is existence, what is time, and what is consciousness. That's 3. And consciousness, you have made a couple of videos about the about the idea that consciousness must have a cardinality of 1, as you put it, which just seemed to confuse the issue to be using this phrase cardinality. And as far as I could understand, what you were saying about that was that consciousness had to be singular, that it had to be its own thing. And you used the example of a computer that could be broken apart into identical consciousnesses, but then if you tried to put them back together, how many consciousnesses would you have? And a number of things occurred to me while trying to sort through what you were really saying here. One was that if consciousness is the process and not the substrate, then if you're literally talking about two identical consciousnesses, literally identical in time and space, or even in any way that is meaningful to the consciousness itself, if you have two of it and they do not vary from each other, then you only have one consciousness. However many places it's located, you're creating a sort of a holographic a protection copy of consciousness, because the consciousness is internal to itself. But if you, for instance, you have your malfunctioning transporter that copies me and sends me to the planet, but forgets to annihilate me back here on the ship, and suddenly there's me on the ship and there's me on the planet. The me on the planet is exactly like the me on the ship up until the point of this accident, at which point two me's begin to occur, where the separate experience of having been on the ship, of being on the ship versus being on the planet, begins to change the person into two separate people. And if you start thinking about these kind of things too much, you realize that, it's like, let's say for some reason you want to get back to just one Captain Kirk after this kind of an accident, and you decide, well, who am I going to kill? Which one is the real Captain Kirk? And let's say you're demented enough not to say, well, we're stuck with two of them now. They each have the right to life. And you got to kill one of them. Then, you have to go to that one and say, look, the real Captain Kirk is back on the ship. You are exactly like him, except you don't know about these 20 minutes that he's been sitting up there, taking aspirin by the handful. And the only difference between you and him is that you don't know that, and this little 20 minutes of experience here. So look, I'm just going to shoot you now, but the real you's not going to die. He's back on the ship. It literally means nothing. It's 20 minutes. It's 20 minutes. You could knock that out with a bottle of alcohol, and then you shoot the extra Captain Kirk, and boom, he's dead, instantly vaporized, so it didn't even hurt. What has happened? The mind begins to reel, but just because it reels doesn't mean that you just haplessly cling to a dumb, obvious common sense about the inviolability of the self. Okay. The other thing that you brought up about this issue of separation is that there might be some kind of special thing about neurons. Well, I think that's utterly bogus. I think that neurons are part of matter like everything else. And by the way, we don't really... The brain is a major part of consciousness, but we don't know that consciousness is, quote unquote, in the brain in the sense of not being in the rest of the body. I mean, it's already been shown that consciousness is a complex interaction between physicality and mentality, whatever mentality is. You can't just in order to build a brain, you have to build all the experience that goes into a brain, and all of the steps forward in artificial intelligence research in the last 20 years or so have come around, have been a result of a certain kind of evolutionary approach to improving the consciousness, rather than a brute force programming approach to filling in all the logic. We will create our own Mr. Spock here. It will be it will be intelligent, but it will it won't be messy. No, it's clearly the messiness of the mind is part of consciousness, and the interaction with the environment. Everything that is impinges upon myself, which is the point that I have been trying to hammer home from Alan Watts, which is that I, as much as I may, leap out of the way of the bus or become frightened when I meet a demented crackhead who is pointing a gun at me, I don't feel like a separate thing disembodied from the rest of the universe. I'm inextricably part of it, and the MetaBob concept is a useful concept, but only a concept. But I can see this is going long and long, and the MetaBob middle-aged brain is losing focus, and I know that I really want to talk about something really important, and now I begin to lose it. Oh.